You explained it perfectly. You laid out the facts. You used clear examples. You stayed calm. And they still did not get it. They nodded. They smiled. And then they said something that proved they missed the entire point. And you felt it, that flash of frustration. That moment where you wonder, are they doing this on purpose? Are they being deliberately obtuse? Or are they actually this unable to understand something so simple? Here's the truth nobody tells you. The problem is not them. The problem is you. And it is a problem that every intelligent person faces. A cognitive blind spot so powerful that it sabotages your ability to communicate the very ideas you understand best. Psychologists call it the curse of knowledge. Once you know something, you cannot remember what it was like. To not know it, you cannot unsee the pattern. You cannot unlearn the framework. And because of that, you make a fatal error. You assume that if you explain the conclusion clearly enough, the other person will understand. But they do not need your conclusion. They need your journey. And you have forgotten the journey because you are already at the destination. Arthur Schopenhauer understood these two centuries ago. The war. Talent hits a target nitrogen monoxide one else can hit. Genius hits a target nitrogen monoxide one else can see. What he meant was that intelligence creates distance. The further you advance in understanding, the harder it becomes to translate that understanding backward to someone who has not made the same journey. Not because they are stupid, but because you have lost the ability to see the world through their eyes. This is male psyche. And today we are going to talk about why intelligent people fail at communication. Not because other people are fools, but because intelligence itself creates predictable blind spots that sabotage explanation. In 1990, a Stanford psychologist named Elizabeth Newton ran a simple experiment. She divided people into two groups, tappers and listeners. The tappers were given a list of well-known songs. Their job was to tap out the rhythm on a table. The listeners had to guess which song was being tapped. Before the experiment, she asked tappers to predict how many listeners would guess correctly. The tappers predicted about 50%. The actual result, 3%. Only 3% of listeners correctly identified the song. Why the gap? Because when the tapper is tapping, they can hear the song in their head. The melody. The lyrics. The instruments. It is obvious to them. But the listener just hears random tapping. They do not have the context. They do not have the framework. And the tapper cannot understand why the listener does not get it. Because in the tapper's mind, it is so clear. This is the curse of knowledge. Once you know something, you cannot imagine not knowing it. And this curse affects intelligent people more than anyone else. Because you know more things. You have more frameworks. You have more context. And you assume all of that context is obvious. Carl Jung identified this pattern in his work on psychological development. He said that highly developed minds operate with symbols and patterns. They're invisible to less developed minds. Not because the less developed mind is broken, but because it has not yet encountered the experiences that create those patterns. You cannot explain a pattern to someone who has not seen enough examples to recognize the pattern. You are showing them the map before they have walked the territory. But here is where it gets worse. Intelligence does not just make you bad at explaining. IT makes you confident that you are good at explaining. This is the intelligence trap. David Robson wrote an entire book on this. He documents case after case of brilliant people making catastrophic communication errors. Doctors who cannot explain diagnoses to patients. Engineers who cannot explain risks. To executives. Teachers who cannot explain concepts to students. Not because they do not understand the material, but because they understand it so well that they have forgotten what confusion feels like. The Dunning-Kruger effect shows that incompetent people overestimate their abilities. But IT has a mirror image. Highly competent people underestimate how hard it is for others to understand what they understand. You think your explanation was clear because IT would be clear to you, but you are not the audience. Sigmund Freud saw this in his clinical practice. He would explain a psychological insight to a patient. The patient would nod. Freud would assume they understood. Then the next session, the patient would do the exact opposite of what the insight should have led them to do. Freud realized that intellectual understanding and emotional integration are completely different processes. This is why arguing facts rarely works. This is why explaining logic often fails, because you're trying to transfer the conclusion without transferring the foundation. Jordan Peterson talks about this in his lectures. He says that agreeable people who are empathetic, are the best at meeting others where they are. But disagreeable people focused on competence and truth, often fail at this. They present the truth as they see IT, and expect everyone else to just get IT. The irony is that disagreeable people are often the most intelligent, but their intelligence is handicapped by their inability to translate patterns into language others can absorb. Here's what nobody tells you. That cost of the curse of knowledge is not just failed communication, it is isolation. When you cannot explain what you see, you end up alone. Not physically, but intellectually, emotionally. You are surrounded by people who do not understand you. And over time, you start to believe that nobody can understand you. Arthur Schopenhauer lived this. He wrote about the porcupine dilemma. Porcupines huddle together for warmth in winter, but their quills prick each other, so they pull apart. They are stuck between freezing in isolation and bleeding in intimacy. But here is what Schopenhauer missed. The porcupine dilemma is not inevitable, is a failure of calibration. The porcupines can find the right distance, close enough for warmth, far enough to avoid their quills. But finding that distance requires awareness. It requires understanding that you have quills. Your intelligence, your knowledge, your frameworks, those are your quills. And if you are not careful, you will use them to push people away without realizing it. In the next segment, we are going to break down the specific errors intelligent people make when explaining the assumptions you do not know you are making, the context you do not realize you are skipping, and the techniques that actually work. Because here is the truth. If you cannot explain what you know, your knowledge is worthless. Intelligence without communication is just isolation with a better view. Let me show you the exact mistakes you are making. These are not character flaws. These are predictable errors that come from intelligence itself. And once you see them, you can fix them. Error number 1. You assume shared context. When you explain something, you reference frameworks the other person does not have. You skip 10 steps because those steps are obvious to you. You use specialized vocabulary without defining IT. You build on concepts they have never encountered. Richard Feynman, one of the greatest physics teachers in history, had a rule. If you cannot explain something to an intelligent 12-year-old, you do not understand it yourself. Not because the 12-year-old is your actual audience, but because the exercise of stripping away jargon and assumptions forces you to identify the actual structure of the idea. Most intelligent people fail this test. They think simplification is dumbing down. It is not. Simplification is mastery. Einstein said, if you cannot explain IT simply, you do not understand IT well enough. When you complain that someone cannot grasp your explanation, you are actually revealing that your own understanding has gaps. Error number 2. Optimize for accuracy over clarity. You add caveats. You add qualifiers. You add edge cases. You want to be technically correct. So you load the explanation with so much precision that it becomes pedagogically useless. Alfred K. Ereseta Inside the map is not authority. When you are teaching someone, you are not giving them reality. You are giving them a map of reality. And a map is useful precisely because IT leaves things out. A map that included every detail of the territory would be as large as the territory itself. IT would be useless. When you explain, your job is not to transfer your entire knowledge base. Your job is to build a simplified model in their mind that is useful, accurate enough to be helpful, simple enough to be retained. But most intelligent people cannot resist the urge to add more detail, more nuance, more complexity, and the explanation collapses under its own weight. Error number 3. You answer the question you wish they asked. They ask how. You answer why. They ask for a practical step. You give them the underlying theory. They want to know what to do next. You explain the historical development of the field. This is an ego trap. You want to show off the depth of your knowledge. You want to demonstrate that you understand the big picture. But they do not care about the big picture yet. They care about solving the immediate problem in front of them. And when you ignore their actual question to deliver the answer you find more interesting, you lose them. Plato understood this. In his dialogues, Socrates does not lecture. He asks questions. He meets people where they are. He follows their line of thinking, and he gently guides them to see the contradictions in their own beliefs. He does not impose his framework. He helps them build their own framework through guided discovery. Most intelligent people do the opposite. They impose, they lecture, they explain, and they wonder why nobody listens. Error number 4. You trigger the backfire effect. This is the most dangerous error. When you present facts that contradict someone's beliefs, you expect them to update their beliefs? But psychological research shows the opposite often happens. The more evidence you present, the more they resist. This is called the backfire effect. Brennan Nyhan studied this extensively. He found that when people are confronted with facts that threaten their identity or their worldview, they do not process those facts objectively. They process them as attacks, and they double down on their original belief to protect their sense of self. This is why political arguments never work. This is why religious debates go nowhere. This is why correcting someone's misinformation often makes them believe IT more strongly. You are not dealing with a logic problem. You are dealing with an identity defense mechanism. Epictetus, the Stoic philosopher, said, "We have 2 ears and 1 mouth so that we can listen twice as much as we speak." But intelligent people do the opposite, speak twice as much as they listen. Because they are so focused on delivering the correct information, that they do not stop to understand why the other person believes what they believe. If you do not understand their belief, you cannot change it. And if you attack their belief without understanding it, you will only make it stronger. Do you see the pattern in these 4 errors? Every single one comes from the same root cause. You are centered on yourself, on your knowledge, on your framework, on your need to be correct. You are not centered on them, on their knowledge, on their framework, on their need to make sense of their world. Communication is not about you being right. Communication is about building a bridge from where they are to where you are. And you cannot build a bridge if you do not know where they are standing, Nietzsche wrote. And those who were seen dancing were thought to be insane by those who could not hear the music. When you cannot explain your ideas, you are the dancer. They cannot hear the music. And instead of helping them hear, you get frustrated that they think you are insane. Marcus Aurelius wrote in his Meditations, "The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way when someone does not understand your explanation. That is not a roadblock. That is information. That is data. That is your opportunity to improve your explanation. but only if you are willing to see IT that way. In the next segment, we are going to cover the techniques that actually work, the specific methods that the best communicators in history used to translate complex ideas into simple language, not by dumbing down, but by building up, step by step, from where the listener is to where you need them to be. Now we get to the practical tools. These are the techniques that actually bridge the gap, not manipulation, not dumbing down, but genuine communication that respects both your intelligence and theirs. Technique number 1. The Feynman technique. Richard Feynman was a genius. He won a Nobel Prize in physics. But what made him legendary was not his research. IT was his ability to explain impossibly complex ideas in simple language. And he had a specific process for doing this. Step 1. Choose a concept you want to explain. Step 2. Write an explanation as if you were teaching it to an intelligent 12-year-old. Step 3. Identify the gaps, the places where you struggle to explain. Those gaps reveal where your own understanding is weak. Step 4. Go back and study those gaps until you can explain them simply. This process forces you to confront the curse of knowledge. When you try to explain something simply and you cannot, that is not because the concept is too complex. That is because you do not understand it fully. You have memorized the conclusion without understanding the foundation. Most intelligent people resist this technique. They think simplification is beneath them. But Feynman proved that simplicity is not the opposite of intelligence. Simplicity is the highest form of intelligence. Anyone can make something complicated. Only masters can make something simple. Technique number 2. Rappaport's rules. Daniel Dennett, a philosopher and cognitive scientist, created a framework for productive disagreement. He called it Rappaport's rules, named after the social psychologist Anatole Rappaport. And it completely changes how arguments work. Rule 1. Before you disagree with someone, state their position back to them in your own words so clearly that they say, "Yes, that is exactly what I think." Rule 2. List any points of agreement you have with their position. Rule 3. Mention anything you have learned from their position. Only after you have done all 3 of these things are you allowed to state your disagreement. Why does this work? Because it lowers defenses. When someone feels heard, when someone feels understood, they stop defending and start listening. But when you jump straight to disagreement, they hear attack, and they fight back. Most intelligent people skip straight to Rule 4. They explain why the other person is wrong, and they wonder why the other person does not listen. But the other person is not listening because you have not earned the right to be heard yet. You earn that right by proving you understand them first. This is not weakness. This is strategy. You are not agreeing with them. You are showing them that you have taken their position seriously enough to understand it, and that makes them willing to take your position seriously in return. Technique number 3. Street epistemology. This technique comes from the work of Peter Boghossian and was popularized by Anthony Magnabosco. IT is based on the Socratic method, but refined from modern conversation, and IT is devastatingly effective. Instead of telling someone they are wrong, you ask them questions. Not aggressive questions, not rhetorical questions. Genuine questions designed to help them examine their own beliefs. The key question is this: what would change your mind? When you ask someone what evidence would change their mind, two things happen. First, they have to think about their belief structure. They have to examine why they believe what they believe. Most people have never done this. They believe things because those beliefs feel right or because those beliefs are tribal markers. They've never stress-tested their beliefs. Second, if they cannot name anything that would change their mind, you have just revealed that their belief is unfalsifiable. IT is not based on evidence. IT is based on identity. And you cannot argue someone out of their identity. You can only help them see that their identity is preventing them from seeing truth. Socrates did this 2,000 years ago. He would ask questions until his opponents contradicted themselves. He did not defeat them with HI's knowledge. He helped them defeat themselves with their own logic. This is the most powerful form of persuasion, because they are not losing an argument to you. They are discovering a flaw in their own thinking. Technique number 4, tactical empathy. This comes from Chris Voss, a former FBI hostage negotiator. He spent decades in life-or-death conversations where he had to get people to change their minds under extreme pressure, and he discovered something that contradicts everything intelligent people think they know. About persuasion, logic does not persuade. Emotion does, but not your emotion. Their emotion. Tactical empathy is the practice of labeling the other person's emotion before you try to change their mind. You say things like, "It seems like you are concerned that this change will hurt your business." Or it sounds like you feel attacked. When people question this belief, you are not agreeing with them. You are acknowledging their emotional state. Why does this work? Because emotions create defenses. When someone is afraid or angry or hurt, their logical brain shuts down. They cannot process your argument, nitrogen monoxide matter, how good it is. But when you acknowledge their emotion, you diffuse it. You show them that you see them as a human being, not as an opponent. Sigmund Freud understood this. He said that until you make the unconscious conscious, IT will direct your life, and you will call IT fate. When someone has an unconscious emotional attachment to a belief, logic cannot touch IT. You have to bring the emotion into consciousness first. You have to name IT. And once IT is named onsit, shan, it loses its power. Most intelligent people ignore emotion entirely. They think emotion is weakness. They think emotion is irrational. But emotion is not the opposite of logic. Emotion is the foundation that logic builds on. And if you do not address the foundation, your logic will never stand. When to disengage. But here is the final piece. Sometimes communication is not worth the effort. Sometimes you need to walk away. And you need to know the difference between giving up too early and knowing when a conversation is genuinely unproductive. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You always own the option of having nitrogen monoxide opinion. There is never any need to get worked up or to trouble your soul about things you cannot control. These things are not asking to be judged by you. Leave them alone. Some arguments are not worth winning. Some people are not ready to hear what you have to say, and that is okay. The goal is not to educate every person you meet. The goal is to communicate effectively when communication matters, and to disengage peacefully when it does not. The difference between a wise person and an exhausted person is this. The exhausted person tries to fight every battle. The wise person chooses which battles deserve their energy, and they walk away from the rest without guilt, without anger, without needing the other person to acknowledge that they were right. In the final segment, we are going to address the hardest part. The questions you have been avoiding about your own communication, because the curse of knowledge is just one problem. The other problem is your ego. Your need to be right. Your need to be recognized as intelligent. And until you kill that need, you will never be free.